So again, did you guys get the PowerPoint that I sent you and everything? So if you want to just kind of take some notes here, don't worry about writing anything down because you have that all there if you just want to take anything. So today I'm just going to talk about the road to what's called the Great War or World War I. Remember, the Great War is what it's called originally because there's no World War I until you have World War II, okay? So that's, if you ever see that, that's what they're referring to. And if you look, I kind of started in 1871 to 1914. Because 1871 is a very important year, because that's the year that Germany and Italy will become actual nations in Europe. And because of this, especially with Germany, it's going to drive them forward in how they think and how they change European politics. Okay? So, you guys should know some of this, I hope, but I'm going to go through it. It's the spark that ignites the powder keg. Think about this. I mean, if you just, real quickly, if you just look at our country, go back to the summer of 2020. What happened in America that really sparked something, that really made some changes in our country? George Floyd, right? And when that happened, I mean, that really, now here's the thing, was that the incident that really made, everybody angry, or was it like things that had been building and building and building and building? It's the same thing here. What happens is, in Sarajevo, Bosnia, which is part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So sometimes, if I just say Austria, remember I'm talking about Austro-Hungarian. Sometimes I just do that for quickness. What happened here is, they want independence, okay? Countries always want their own independence, and they're not getting it because Austria doesn't want to give up any of its territory. At this point here, there's the Emperor of Austria, Franz Joseph. He's like in his 80s now. He's been around a long time. He's dying. So the next person coming in is this man here, the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And he's not really all that well liked. He's one of those people who's still living in the 1800s, who still believes that he has the right to rule like an emperor, with like an absolute monarchy. He truly believes that, where people are starting to move more towards democracy and so forth. So he's going to go to Sarajevo to give this speech to basically more or less say to people, look, we know you want independence, but you're part of our nation. You are not leaving, okay? There's information that he might be assassinated, which was not going to be unusual. A lot of times that would happen when you would go places. But foolish him, instead of doing anything to protect himself, he goes in a convertible because, hey, why not? So to give you an idea here, and I'll have to walk a little bit off camera every now and then to get my PowerPoint to work. So if you look here, here's the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and here is Bosnia and Herzegovina, okay? And so we really just kind of refer to it quickly as Bosnia because it's just easier. And over here is Serbia. And Serbia wants to also expand into this area because now you got people who want, the more land you own, the more powerful you are. And you become a bigger player on the world stage. So what happens here is this man's name is Gavrilo Princip. Gavrilo Princip. Did you guys hear about him at all? Okay. So far is everything making sense? Yeah. Raise your hands at any time. He's the mastermind of the attempt, and what happens here is, I don't know if you can get into this whole story because it's kind of funny how it happens, but he just happened to be on the right corner at the right time when the driver of that car made a wrong turn and he shoots the Archduke. When that happens, everything starts going in, clicking into place. What do I mean by that? There's this secret group out there called the Black Hand. The Black Hand was a group that was in Serbia that had been working to undermine or get rid of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So what they did is they worked with this group called the Young Bosnians, of which he's a member of, and they worked with him to try and assassinate, the Archduke. When this happens, Austria obviously is very upset. Let's be honest, if one of our officials, a vice president, a president, secretary of state were killed, would Americans be happy about that? No, because the bottom line is that's an attack on America. And Austria sees it the same way. So what happens here is Austria says, we want to send in our own police, our own teams to actually do the investigation as to what level the Black Hand was in And because again, because they want to go into Serbia. They don't control Serbia, but they want to go into Serbia to do the investigation. When you allow another country to come in and investigate in your own nation, you know what you just told them? You have the power, we don't. Nations don't want to give up their power, do they? Because of that, Serbia basically says no, and they look to Russia, who happens to be one of their allies, because they're Slavic people, which I'll explain in a little bit. At the same time that Serbia looks to Russia, the Austrians look to Germany, who are their allies, and say, help. If Russia gets involved, Germany, what are you going to do to help us, Austrians? So right now, we've got some tension. How does Germany respond? Have you heard of the blank check?
No.
No, you have not heard the blank check. The reason why it's called, has anybody ever gotten a check and it's been blank? Would you like that? Oh yes you would. Because if I give you a check and I have signed it and it says blank, that means you can write whatever amount of money you want on there and cash it. Germany does this. They say to Austria, no matter what happens, we will back you, we will support you, we will fight with you, no matter what. What happens is by giving this blank check to Austria, instead of the Austrians saying to the Russians, okay, let's negotiate, let's kind of figure this out, they basically can stand and say, no, we're going into Serbia or else, because we have Germany's backing. And with that, this is why it's called the blank check. Part of it is Wilhelm, that's William II, who's the new Kaiser in Germany. He's good friends with them. He also was not happy about the assassination. And so basically, as we're working through this, and it kind of makes sense, is as they're working through this, you've got all of these negotiations going on behind the scenes. It's amazing what happens behind the scenes, how many documents are sent back and forth. And at a time, Serbia agrees to stop, using anti-Austrian propaganda and stuff. So everybody's thinking, okay, everything's going to settle down. Until the Austrians kind of felt insulted still by what was going on in Serbia. And how dare this little nation, that's a nothing, attack a big nation like this by killing one of our royalty, one of our members of our government. And with this, Austria attacks Serbia. Serbia says, okay, Russia, what are you going to do? So Russia tells the Austrians, withdraw. As this is happening, there are letters going back and forth between William II and Tsar Nicholas II, who are cousins, and they're going back and forth like, don't mobilize, okay, I won't, yes you will, no you won't, and they're fighting with each other over words. Eventually what happens is Germany says to heck with it, declares war on Russia, but attacks France. And this is all going to make sense here in a little bit, and there's a reason why. So this is the insanity. So Germany now says to Russia, we're going to go to war with you, and we're going to attack France first. It's part of something called the Schlieffen Plan, which I'll explain to you in a minute. When this happens, Germany has to go through a little country called Belgium. The Belgians had asked the English back in 1848, look, we don't want to fight wars anymore. We just, kind of want to make chocolate. No, I'm joking. They do have for chocolate, though. But they're like, basically, hey, you know what? We don't want to go to war. Will you protect our sovereignty? And the British said, yes, if you're ever attacked, we'll go to war to protect you. So when Germany attacks France and they go through Belgium, England now comes in, and what happens here is we have a world war. Have you ever played Twister? Or seen Twister? Like, who's got their hand on the red and the green and the yellow, and it's like, that's kind of what it's like. It's all interacting. So, good question. You're asking, why would Germany attack France, right? It doesn't make sense, right? Do you guys know why? No?
They want land expansion.
Land expansion?
I guess take them out of the fight before the fight begins.
Take them out of the fight before the fight begins? Yep. We're going to look at it here in a second. So we're going to look at this, and it's going to be called the Schlieffen Plan. I'm going to come back to it. You guys know about these four causes: militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism, right? Have you guys heard these before? Okay. So it's the main, okay? So if you look at it here, to give you a little background on Germany, because Germany is going to be a new player, and with the German nation, you're going to see Europe become very different and the world become very different. So, from 1871 to 1888, there is a man by the name of Otto, O-T-T-O, Otto von Bismarck. This is an important name for you. It really is. Okay? He was the German chancellor who basically would get all of these little treaties with different countries together, and what he did with those is he basically kept everybody at bay, friendly with them, with the Germans, but everybody at bay, so he never had to worry about fighting war. Because where is Germany when it comes to Europe, geographically? In the middle. So let that sit there with you. Unfortunately, and that's why he doesn't want to from war. Unfortunately, Kaiser William I will die, and when this young man here, who's cousins with Nicholas II and Edward, who's over in England, and his grandmother's the same grandmother they all have. It's a family feud, guys. This is a family feud. He takes over. He and Bismarck do not get along. They don't see things the same way. What happens here is Bismarck never really saw Austria as a really good ally. Do you know why? They didn't have a very strong army as compared to the Russians or to the French. So even though Bismarck had destroyed the French in a war, the Franco-Prussian War, and became a nation, they still said about the French, yeah, they're a big, strong nation. We need to kind of keep them friendly or at least just off balance. When all of this is going on, Bismarck resigns, and once he resigns, Germany and Europe are going to be very, very different. What can I tell you? Now I'm going to move on from that. You don't need to do that. Let me see. Oh yeah, the only thing I want to tell you, this is, I think I told you guys this before, blah, 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 but what's really important here is this, is he is going to appear extremely, extremely aggressive to most countries. He's going to want an empire like the British that never sets, the sun never sets on the British Empire. No matter where you were, the British owned some of that land. He's going to build a navy called the Risk Fleet. Have you heard that before? The Risk Fleet is this. England has the best navy in the world. That's what they're built on. He and Admiral Tirpitz, who is the German admiral of their navy, want to build a fleet so big and so large that England will not risk having them as an enemy. That the British will say, oh my God, this navy's so great, even though ours is a little better, they're so great, we don't want to risk it, we want to be friends. That's what he wants out of it. But when he builds this Risk Fleet, all he's doing is building up more tensions. Militarism. Have you guys talked anything about the military and the buildup of militaries? A little bit? So basically, let me just go through this here, is what started to happen at the end of the 19th century, the 1800s, end of the 19th century, is armies and navies were just growing by leaps and bounds, standing armies. Most of the time, armies were never, they weren't professional. You had smaller armies, and then if you needed to fight, you would draft people in or you would force people in. Now they're having large standing armies who are training and training and training and training. So we have some more technical terms, and this will be important when you talk about, in your IB papers, but the warship tonnage, troop concentration, military expenditures. But what's happening here is they're believing that the more they build up, the more they're going to deter any kind of war. Think about this. I always like to break it down into simple things that you can understand. You've got the two biggest kids in the high school, both big, both strong. Do they really want to fight each other? Probably not. Why? What's that? It's not a guaranteed win, and at the same time, even if they win or even come to a draw, you're both going to be very hurt from it, right? It's the same thing with these. So if I've got 5 million men and you've got 4.5 to 5 million men, and we fight, we're both going to lose big time. It's with the Cold War right now. The United States has nukes, the Soviets have nukes. Do you really want to fire nukes? Because we could destroy you, you could destroy us. Mutual annihilation. So, this is what they they hoped was happening, but unfortunately, that's not the way it's going to work. Militaries are going to start thinking, is it better to attack preemptively? Hence why the Germans will go to France before they go to Russia. Mobilize before your enemy does, and basically, if you look at it, the armies are just massive. So let me move on. So militarism. This is Admiral Tirpitz. He is the one who built the Riss fleet. This also created an arms race, because what the British did is they said, okay, for every one German ship that's going to be built, we'll build 2. So the Germans said, fine, we'll build more. They said, we'll build more. And what's happening? It's escalating like there's no tomorrow, okay? One of the things is, in war, is everybody always thinks they're fighting the war that just happened. They are fighting an 1800s war when we now have 1900s technology. One of the things they also think, especially in Germany, if there's a war, it's going to be very quick. Because if you looked at Prussia, have you heard of Prussia? Prussia, if you look at all of Germany, Prussia's in this like, so if this is Germany here, it's like all of this big part over here in the like east. That was the biggest state. It's a very warlike nation. And prior to Germany becoming a country, it was like the Prussians and the people from Hanover and all these other places. Well, Prussia will pull everybody together, but to do that, they fought a series of wars in the 1860s and 70s. Most of the wars went like this. Literally, some of them were literally 5-6 weeks long. So they think if they get into another war, it's going to be very, very, very quick. The unfortunate reality is it won't. Am I going too fast? Making sense? Okay. So the other thing that's going to hurt, in a sense, is the technological developments. Understand that because of industrialization, factories can now put out so much more material than they ever could before. And and with the increase in technology and better weaponry, this is going to play a real pivotal role in the destruction of over 11 million men in World War I. You're going to have a naval arms race, and if you think about it, just in the navies alone, you're going to have an increase of over 197%. This is massive. People are just building and building and building for what? We don't know. Alliances. Alliances. At this point here, Europe is going to be split into 2 rival alliances as we go around. Otto von Bismarck. So remember I was telling you about Prussia? This was all of Prussia out here. It was the largest and most militaristic out of all the German peoples. What he did, Otto von Bismarck did, is he always set up treaties to keep Germany strong and France weak, because they share this border and France is a strong navy. They wanted to keep them weak. So in 1879, the Austrians and the Germans create something called the Dual Alliance, 2 countries. In 1882, they will bring in the Italians. So if you look at it, except for neutral Switzerland, because they're the bankers, they don't want to go to war, because they're the bankers, they make money off war, they don't want to go to war. What happens is, this is the only area that is not touching France, besides Belgium and the Netherlands, that is not surrounding the French with an alliance. To take it a step further, Bismarck turns around, and with Russia, he creates another treaty called the Reinsurance Treaty. What it says is, look, hey, Russia, if Germany and France get into a fight with each other, we have a reinsurance agreement that you won't fight us because, hey, we have a treaty. This is going to help the Germans from having a 2-front war. Does that make sense? They always want to make sure they're not fighting on 2 fronts, because if you're fighting, you got to split your army. If you're the French and all you have to do is put your army here, you can put the whole thing there. If you're the Russians, you can put the whole thing here. If you're fighting two fronts, you gotta put half here and half there, right? That's huge. So that's what Bismarck's trying to do. The unfortunate reality is in 1890, the reinsurance treaty ends. At this point here, Russia and France have become more and more friendly because the Russians had been sending people to Paris to become more European, more cultured. So there's this like union of ideas and countries. So they now become an alliance. And what's England doing? What does splendid isolation mean?
Living in their own world.
They're living in their own world. Think about it. Are they touching any nations? All ocean around them, right? All water. And what England does is this. Remember we talked about a seesaw? Right? So what happens on a seesaw? If you have a guy who's 100 pounds and a guy who's 100 pounds, what happens to the seesaw? It's pretty balanced, right? But all of a sudden you put a guy who's, you put another 50 pounds here, what happens? Tips that way, or if it this way. So what England is always saying is, look, we don't want war, because war is not good for our business as we trade all over the world. So we don't want war. So if all of a sudden we see the Russians and the French becoming very powerful in their alliance, so it's leaning this way, we will start moving this way towards the Germans and the Austrians to balance it back out, or vice versa. That's what they mean by living in splendid isolation. That's what they want to do. So the other thing that's going on is the Germans have been very aggressive in South Africa. They have been very aggressive with their risk fleet. And so what's happening here is Germany, instead of pulling the British towards them, and if you think about it, they have a common, they're a common people. What are the British? They're the Anglo-Saxons. Where are the Saxons from? Saxony. Where's Saxony? Germany. They have a lot of blood that they share together. That's why if you look at people sometimes and they're like, I don't know if you're British or if you're German, they have a lot of similar facial features because they share ancestry. So they really thought, the Germans really never thought the British would pull away from them, but they do. And eventually they create the Triple Entente, which is another alliance. Questions? No? Everybody's got it? Got it, Janice? I thought you'd give me one of those looks like, it's okay. There's a lot to this. So, what happens now is the alliance system is going to create a system of mistrust. And now where's Germany?
In the middle.
In the middle. Where did Germany not want to be? In the middle. They are now encircled. That's the word that you use. They're encircled. You don't want to put in the middle. You use the term encircled if you're going to write about this, because that's important. This is why Hitler will do what he does to try and not have a two-front war. Imperialism, you guys know about imperialism, right? Basically, the belief is that you can't be a great nation unless you have an empire, unless you have colonies, etc. So Germany, since they are a brand new country as of 1871, they're trying to catch up. And as they're trying to catch up, they have to go out there and be more and more and more and more and more aggressive, okay? Kaiser Wilhelm will come out with what's called the Weltpolitik. I know it looks like Weltpolitik, but it's Weltpolitik because the W's are V sounding in German. What this means is world politics or world policy. He's going to come out with this statement that we, like the British, have the right to have our place in the sun, have our empire where the sun never sets on it. And with this, they will become aggressive in two different places. In Morocco, did you guys go over those last year? Did you do the Moroccan Wars last year with Mrs. Infanzon? No? Okay. Well, basically, there's two wars going on, or two crises in Morocco that has to do with, France and Morocco and colonies and colonization. And the Germans just butt themselves in for no reason whatsoever. And this looks very, very aggressive. And what William II is hoping to do is use what's called gunboat diplomacy, or as we said when we got to the Cold War, atomic diplomacy. We've got an atomic bomb and you don't, right? He was trying to say, like, look, we've got enough gunboats, we've got enough naval power to kind of push our policy on you. Again, this is just going to continue to push the British away. Nationalism, I don't think I need to say more about that. It's my nation, right or wrong, my nation, it's the greatest thing. You know, people just basically blindly follow. Nationalism is pretty easy, right? And so, you know, if I'm a German and all of a sudden a Frenchman hurts me, I'm upset with the French because they just hurt a German. You don't do that, right? Okay. Here to give you an idea of all the different places that were colonized, how they had basically colonized all of Africa. And as you can see, you know, between Spain, France, and Great Britain, they've got, you know, a good portion of it. And if you look here, here's Germany. They've got very, very little because they're late to the party. And it was the same thing over here. If you look at Southeast Asia, the South Pacific, it's the same thing. There's really not a lot of German presence there, is there? And for Wilhelm, it's like, wait, we need to have our presence out there. They will kind of like have an influence here, but I mean, it's basically they're controlling water. You know what I'm saying? It's not like here. I mean, look at Australia. You know, look at India. Those are big, big places. That's what the British have. Questions on this make sense? So, what's going to really get everything going? Now I'm coming back to Serbia and Bosnia. You remember when we were talking about Serbia and Bosnia at the beginning? It's going to be called the Balkans. We talk about the Balkans, we're talking about this region of the world right here. So this is like Southeast Europe that goes eventually into Asia here. So we're talking about Bosnia, Serbia, would eventually be Croatia, Albania, Macedonia, down through Greece, and some of like Bulgaria and so forth. So what happens here is this: these people are what's called Slavic. Remember I told you that the British and the Germans are both German people? The Austrians and the Germans are both Germanic people. That means they share common language, they share common ancestry. The Slavic people also share very much a lot of similarities. And so these people, there's a lot of Slavs up here through this region into Russia, and Poland, which eventually will come back, which is up here, are Slavic people. Hence why Hitler went after all the Slavs. He wanted to get rid of those inferior people. What happens here is Serbia wants to have what's called a Yugoslavia, which we'll eventually get after World War II. It's an all-Slavic nation. Is this making sense? Okay. So what they want is this all-Slavic Yugoslavia. So to do this, what they have to do is they have to get rid of an empire called the Ottoman Empire. This Ottoman Empire right here used to be the Turkish Empire in a sense, the Ottomans. They are known as the sick man of Europe, because even though they go out here into Asia, they did have this little part of Europe. And this empire is dying. Yep, feel free, you gotta go. It'll be taken. Yep. This empire is absolutely dying. And so what the Serbians want to do is get rid of the Ottomans. So they start a war. The Ottomans are losing because they really just don't have a strong army or a military anymore. But what happens here is this, is the major powers step in because A, they don't want war, and they don't want to unbalance or imbalance in their power. And it's a lot more depth into that, but you don't need to know that for your IB exams. But they step in. When they do this, Serbia is not happy because they want to grow in strength. Okay, so again, here's kind of what it looks like. Now, what's going to happen is there's going to be a second war where Serbia, Greece, Romania, so Serbia, Greece, and Romania, where's Romania? Just left here. Romania or Romania, you can say it either way, are going to attack Bulgaria because Bulgaria kind of had helped the Ottoman Empire at one point in the last war. So these countries want to get revenge on them. Bulgaria will lose. Serbia is going to become twice as large as it was. Serbia wants to bring Bosnia in. See how we've come back to where we were? Wants them in. And this is all going to lead to the assassination in the blank check. So do you see how we've come now full circle to get to that point? Questions so far? I'm almost done. I got probably about 15 more minutes. Okay. So, now we're going to answer your question. It's called the Schlieffen Plan. Von Schlieffen was the military general of Germany in the 1890s. He looked at Europe, he looked at what was happening, he looked at the fact that France and Russia had now become allies and said, what do? We are in the middle. How do we fight a two-front war? And what they decided to do was the following. They looked at Russia and said, we know historically, especially with what's been going on in Russia in the late 1800s, they are a backwards nation. Yes, there's a lot of people there. They're mainly serfs or peasants. They're a lot of farming. There's not a lot of industry. They don't have weapons. We know that we don't have to worry about them. If we go to war, we know that they're not going to be the first issue and problem we have to deal with. What we know is that France has always been a strong, powerful nation, and that's where we got to worry. So what they decide to do is the following. They say, we're going to take basically 2/3 of our entire army if there's a war. If we go to war with Russia, or even if we go to war with France, but if we go to war with Russia, we're going to take 2/3 of our army and we're going to attack the French. The other third will go over to Russia, or that, on that border. And when they're on that border, they can then basically hold them back, because it shouldn't be that tough to do. They're not that strong. The other 2/3 of the army should be able to go in and defeat the French like we just did 20 years ago. It was nothing. Should be quick, 6, 7, 8, maybe 10 weeks, done. And then what we'll do is after we defeat them, we'll just bring those troops back across, stick them on that border and go, do you really want to fight us? No, I don't think so. And then we win that side of the war too. This is their thinking. So the Schlieffen Plan is all about attacking your enemy preemptively and not waiting to be attacked. Does this make sense to you? Yes or no? So what happens is this. The problem is, the only way that Germany can get to France and do what they want to do is they have to go through Belgium. But Belgium is what? Protected by the British. So when they go through Belgium, England basically goes, we've got to get in the war. And this is how the war starts. The other thing is the Russians definitely mobilized faster than what was expected. But the Germans weren't too far off about how poorly ready the Russians were going to be. At the first Battle of Tannenberg on the Eastern Front between the Germans and the Russians, literally 1 out of every 3 Russians going into battle did not have a weapon. They had to wait for somebody to die to pick up a weapon to be able to fight. So, there was some truth in what they were thinking. So, if you look at it, this is the Schlieffen Plan, okay? And the person who's going to put this in motion is not Schlieffen, he's dead. So the new man is going to be this guy von Moltke. You don't need to know that. Except for the fact that he's going to bring his troops in, and what they're supposed to do is they're supposed to go around and capture Paris, and then come on back like this. Because what's supposed to happen is the French are going to be sending all of their men here, so this is a way to come around it. It's called Plan 712. I forget the name of the plan. It's up here in a minute. That's what they're expecting to do. What happens, though, is when they start this war, the German army gets here and right here at the Marne River. It's called the Miracle of the Marne. Did you hear that? About that? Okay. The Miracle of the Marne is where the French were able to stop the Germans. And instead of taking this, they now go into a front that is basically called the Western Front. So what's supposed to happen is, one more time, here are what the Germans are supposed to do, because what the French have planned is they're going to go straight over to this area here and protect this area, because they're not expecting the Germans to come through Belgium. They're expecting them to come more towards their border. And this is called Plan 17. Questions on that? That make sense? Okay. So when you eventually see it, and we'll get there, is what's eventually going to happen is this western front is going to be along here, because the Germans never got their troops around, and they never brought them back over this way. And again, here's Tannenberg, and this is where, again, 1 out of 3 Russians didn't have a weapon. And at this point here, and by the way, at first Italy is part of this, but they're Italian. They don't see that they're going to win probably, so they switch to the winning side. And they eat some pasta. I'm joking. All right. Oops. Don't ask me what that did. That was weird. Real quickly here, and you guys could just kind of look at this, but I just put it up there so you can understand all of the connections between these people. I mean, don't they look like the same guy? They're cousins. I mean, they're not the same guy. They're 2 different men. Isn't that amazing? That's how, and if you really had a chance to look at him, if he had more of that beard, he probably would look similar. So it's basically, at this point here, you're going to have the Central Powers, which will be Germany, Austria, Ottoman Empire, and Italy, until Italy decides to join the Allies in 1915. Okay? That one's pretty self-explanatory. Again, they think it's going to be a very quick war, so when war breaks out, people are enthusiastic. They can't wait to get there and be part of this war and be a hero. They really think that this will be over by Christmas. You know, the boys will be home for Christmas. Instead, we know that it's going to last for 4 years. You could see the excitement. Everybody's excited going off to war. I promise you, a couple of years later, this would not be the case. People were dreading going off to war because... I think I talked to you guys about this, did I? About how World War I will shape the 20th century? Yes, no? I'll do it anyway. So what happens here is World War I is very, very important because it's going to shape what happens for the rest of the next basically 100 years. All the empires are basically going to fall in Europe, and it's going to become much more democratic, except in a few spots, specifically Russia. Russia's going to go from a czar, absolute monarchy, to communism. We'll leave it there. Austria-Hungary is going to go from this large empire to all of these small countries when we're done. Like, all of a sudden you're going to get Poland back, you're going to get Czechoslovakia, you're going to get, Austria is going to become very small, you're going to get, it totally just changes. Germany goes from Kaiser to democracy, which Hitler's going to rail against, and that's going to help him win. The Ottoman Empire is totally destroyed, which now means that the British will get control of an area called Israel, which is now going to set up the Jewish-Arab issues that we've been dealing with for the last 70, 80 years. That's going to come from this. Old standards of government are gone. Democracies are going to grow. Class systems. It's not so much about, I'm upper class and you're not. World War is going to become much more impersonal because I can kill you from a distance, which I couldn't do before. It used to be where it's more hand-to-hand kind of combat, and you saw your enemy die, you saw it, you heard it. Now it's going to be, you're so far away, I can just take you out with like a sniper bullet, or I don't even know who you are. You're just a body running, and you're down. It's very impersonal. You don't really get to see the enemy. If you ever get a chance to read a book, it's called All Quiet on the Western Front. It's an incredible book. I've read it about 6, 7 times. But there's a scene in there where Paul, who's from Germany, he jumps into a shell hole, it's been into the ground. And he's in there, and because there's like all these attacks going on, and all of a sudden somebody jumps in. And all of a sudden, without, he just looks, realizes it's a French guy, and first thing he does is takes his knife and kills him. Well, he doesn't kill him right away. The guy is actually stabbed and stuff, but as he's dying, the whole chapter is about how he's dying, and you can hear the gurgling and all the stuff that's going on and so forth. And it's very graphic, but at the end, you know, all of a sudden Paul takes out like some papers and he's like, you know, I'm making up the name, I don't remember. Oh, this is Jean Paul, who was a baker in Paris. Oh, I wonder if I would have liked his, you know, his biscuits that he would make. Would I like the donuts that he makes? And what he starts to realize is that Jean Paul is not just some, like, you know, I have to hate you, you're the enemy, you're a French. He's an actual real man with probably a family and everything else. And so what happens is that, you know, that's why that part of the book is in there, because most of them never really saw the enemy they were killing. And there's the book right there. I didn't realize I had it up there. This again is going to lead to everything that we're going at right now, which is Nazism, fascism, communism, etc., etc. And I mean, you know, creation of Israel is going to have issues. This is where the word fascism comes from. It's a bundle of sticks literally, it's a bundle of sticks. And if you had it, you had the power of the Romans to rule and govern. And just a real quick overview of the Western Front. Did you guys do any of this, like trenches, what they look like? Basically, it's going to be this stalemate where you got these long dugout holes, and I mean, they're rat-infested, waterlogged. Has anybody ever smelled a dead animal decay? They say the body of a human is much worse to smell, and there are thousands and hundreds of thousands of that happening. Literally, they are fighting for, like, you know, it's like this offensive, we're going to go 200 yards that way and take over your trenches, and when you counterattack, you're going to push us back and maybe back about 200 yards, but then we're going to counterattack. So they're fighting over the same land constantly. I mean, there is some changes here and there, but I mean, that's pretty much, it's a lot of sad. All of these new weapons here are going to make war very, very, very deadly. Give you an idea of what some of the Western Front looks like. So they're going to start wearing gas masks. I actually have a gas mask from a dead Japanese soldier in World War II. I have it right over somewhere in here. I think it's in there. I'll have to show you guys sometime. It's pretty neat. Oh, I buy a lot of stuff. I've got like thousands of dollars of stuff. Here's going over the top into no man's land where you didn't want to be. Anybody know who this is? That's Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler was actually a corporal in the German army. He was from Austria. He hated the Austrians so much, he just thought that they were too bourgeois, you know, just not real authentic Germans. So he went and he actually joined the German army, Germany's army, and he was a colonel. He's actually a runner, which was a very dangerous job, actually. From all what people say about him, you know, they knew him, they said he was actually a very good soldier. I mean, but he was only a corporal. He will go into World War II thinking he's a master, you know, general, like 5-star general, but he wasn't. And if only he had taken a bullet. Did I say that out loud? Whoops, don't ask me why that did that. So again, if you take a look here, this is what it looks like. Questions, honestly, any questions? So this is how the war starts and how it gets going. And a lot of it, you know, a good thesis of it is you could look at is the alliances that are built, but then you can look and you could almost talk about how Germany was very aggressive, at least aggressive looking, through their policies. And you can almost bring it through like William II and some of the things that he was doing. Okay? Does this help?
Yes.
Does it make more sense now? So what I want to do next, and I'm going to upload this will be called like Lesson 1, World War I, probably, you know, Road to the War. As time goes on, the next week I'll do another one, and I'm going to look at where she was going, but probably do more like weaponry and that kind of stuff there for you, okay? All right, well thank you for being here. Hour of cast time. If you watch it at home, you get the same thing. And feel free to ask me questions. Sorry I'm going so fast though.
No, it's okay.
You can take me off now, yeah.